Hello and welcome to our second session of Point Man. Today's session is Save the Boys. It's going to be a little different because I know you're coming off of a Thanksgiving week. And so I'm going to include some questions that I'd like for you to discuss as we are going through. And so I'll come to these questions. I'll say, how about stopping the recording at this point and then pick it up when you finish the discussion. When God created man first, He wove into the very fabric of the universe the DNA of male leadership. God's way is the only way to save our families, our communities, and our nation. And that is for godly men to step up and be the loving servant leaders. Now, your sons are the leaders of tomorrow. If our families are going to win the war that we find ourselves in, the war that's waging against us, and I don't think there's any question, if you look at what society is doing, you'll see the battle that's going against the traditional family. And the only way we're going to win this battle is if we will raise sons who will be the loving servant leaders of tomorrow. And Dad, that responsibility is yours. God has placed it at your doorstep, and you cannot give it to anybody else. Not to the football coaches, not to the school teachers, not to some other scout leader, but God has placed it at our doorstep that we are responsible for teaching our sons to be godly, loving, servant leaders. And I want us to just look at the verse in Proverbs 17:6, because God has not only woven it into the fabric and the DNA of our society and community that men must be spiritual leaders, but He's also woven it into the very heart of a young boy that his father is the one he looks up to more than anybody else. He looks to you to be that role model that he needs. He doesn't know what it is to be a man. He has no concept. His mother cannot teach him that. You are the best person in the world, and I mean absolutely the best, to teach your sons how to be a godly man. Over in Proverbs 17:6 it says, grandchildren are the crown of old men, and the glory of sons is their father. You remember, if you had a dad at home, you know how you looked up to him. And he was everything to you. He was your glory. You bragged about him. And I hope you had a dad you could brag about. And if you were unfortunate and didn't have that kind of dad, then I want you to know all hope is not lost. You may say, well, I didn't have a role model. I don't know how to teach my sons to be godly men. Well, that's what this book is all about. And that's why I'm so excited about this study, because you're going to learn how to be that man who is that role model for his sons. Now, there are two guiding principles that he talks about in the book about showing us how we can be that role model to our sons of a godly man. First, it's the principle of fathering is to be there. If you're going to be that role model, you've got to be there. He's got to see you. He's got to know you. He's got to see you day in and day out. Now, the Bible talks about this over in Deuteronomy chapter 6, as we read there in verses 4 through 7, as God has led through Moses the children of Israel out of Egypt, and the generation that had voted not to go into the promised land has died. You remember, no one who was 20 and above who voted not to go in, God said, will go into the promised land. So they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years until everybody who'd voted died. And so then they have the second giving of the law. These people were not old enough, who are alive now were not old enough to understand the first giving of the law in Mount Sinai. And so there is a second giving of the law. And that's what Deuteronomy means, second law. And in chapter 6, we read, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart." Now listen to this. "You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." Now this means at all times. He covers everything. He covers it when you talk to them, when you sit, when you're in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. That means you've got to spend time with them. There's no way around it. You have got to spend quality time with your sons. And if you don't have sons, with your daughters. You need to teach them what a godly man looks like so they'll know what to look for in a husband. Now, there are three aspects of discipling your sons. First, you got to spend time with them. And that is taking them to ball practice, coaching them perhaps, going out. If they're playing baseball, I used to take my boys out. I'd hit flies to them. I'd hit ground balls. We'd go out and spend time together. I'd teach them how to field the ball. I coached them in Little League and a few years after that. And so spending time with them, doing things together. Now, your boys or your son may not be inclined the same way you are. He may not enjoy sports. And so you've got to find something he does enjoy so you can spend time with him doing that. Maybe you're not that much into sports and we're not growing up, but he is. Well, then you've got to learn. And you've got to get out there and do the best you can to just spend time with him. And so find out what your son likes. Don't make him do what you like. Find out what he enjoys, what he likes, and then do that together. And then because you're spending time with him, then you must have second element of discipleship is a time of teaching them the truth of God. Teaching them God's Word. Now, this must be age appropriate. If they're 3 years old, you're not going to sit down and have a 20-minute Bible study. But what you can do before they go to bed at night is you can have a 5-minute story that you tell them of someone in the Bible. You pick a story like Jonah and the big fish, and you take a moral in that story. The story in Jonah that I used to tell them was, you cannot hide from God. He tried to hide, but you can't hide from God. But also that God is a forgiving God. He forgave Jonah for his disobedience. So take a story, just tell it in your own words. Act it out. When they couldn't even understand much, when they were that first year of life, we had a Bible that had pictures in it. And we would just look at those pictures of Bible stories and I'd just point out things to them and tell them about it. There are a lot of aids out there. There are aids you can get on your iPad to help you tell them stories. But just to be able to spend 5 minutes telling them stories at that young age, doing that consistently. And then that teaching time gets longer as they get older. So there are the two aspects of spending time with them, having a time that you do instruct them in the truth of God. And then the third aspect of discipleship is something you cannot plan, but when it happens, you know it. And it's those teachable moments. When they come to you and say, Dad, I really got hurt today in school. I got embarrassed. I fell down and my friends laughed at me. The girls laughed at me and it really hurt. And you can talk to them about, yes, son, I know it hurt. I understand that. I know you probably got angry and mad with them. But what does the Bible say? It says, pray for those who might curse you. Treat your enemies with love. Treat those who mistreat you in kindness. And it is in those teachable moments, and you never know when they're going to happen. But it's because you're having the quantity time, and because you're having that time you're instructing them, that those teachable moments happen. And you are there when they do happen. And that's when you speak truth into their lives, and it sticks. It stays there, and it molds them into being a young man of God who loves God and walks with Him. So there are 3 questions I want you to discuss. I want you to stop the tape, discuss them. I'm going to have them up on the screen so you can see them. I want you to think about last week. How much time did you spend with your sons last week? If you didn't have sons, how much time did you spend with your daughters? Second question, what challenges do you face in spending time with them? And then third, what changes do you need to make so you can spend more time with your sons? Stop the tape, discuss this, and then start it back. The second principle of fathering is to teach them to act like men. First is spend time with them. Secondly is teach them how to act like men. Like I said earlier, they don't know what a man is and how a man should act. Paul told the church over in Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, and let all you do be done in love. Now that last part is very important. You're not a drill sergeant to your sons. You need to model to them loving servant leadership, not a macho man. They can see John Wayne and get that picture. You want to show them what was the servant heart of Jesus. You want a model? You didn't have a model growing up? Look at Jesus. He is a perfect model of perfect manhood. He had a tender side, but he had a firm side. When he needed to, he ran out the money changers from the temple with a whip. When he needed to, he could be firm with the Pharisees and tell them they were just a den of serpents. They were whitewashed tombs. They looked all good on the outside, but inside they were rotten and full of decay. So Jesus could be kind, he could be severe, whatever the occasion called for. But you dads are the role models that your sons will see. I remember I used to love to go down to a farm that my dad had when I was young, 5 or 6, 7. I remember walking through the fields. He would be ahead of me. And I would watch where his feet landed in the field, and I would try to step in his steps. Try to put each foot where he put his last one. Now, that's just a picture of how a son wants to emulate his father. He is looking at you, and you are a role model, whether you understand it or not. So the only question is, what kind of role model will you be? Here are the next questions. What's one trait you learned from your dad that you want to emulate in your sons? And then what kind of role model are you being for your sons? And then the third question, what do you need to change in order to be the role model you want to be and that God wants you to be? I hope you have a great discussion. And Lord willing, we'll talk again next week.